you, Michelle. Bang! I crashed the DC-9 simulator that I was trying to land. It was hard. The books fell off the shelf. My fellow students groaned. The instructor undid his seatbelt, stood up, and said, "Damn!" It was 2 o'clock in the morning. They were training 24/7. It wasn't that he was in a bad mood. It was that I had shaken everyone up drastically and unexpectedly. He said nothing. He went to the door, opened it, put the bridge down to the hallway, ushered everybody to leave. We were only halfway through. We single-filely walked across the bridge, down the hall. He stomped off in the other direction. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm very happy to be here this morning, and I appreciate the honor to speak with you. Fortunately, among that group of students was a gentleman that was very kind, sought me out, and took me back to where we were staying. He had flown Learjets, and he explained about landing jets. Now, I'd flown lots of airplanes that had turbine engines, but they had propellers. And jets land differently. He explained this to me on the way back. Now, what was I doing before I tried to be an Eastern Airline pilot? I was landing off and on the 12-story rooftop of the University of Pennsylvania in downtown Philadelphia. And believe me, flying a helicopter at 300 feet, landing on the top of a roof in downtown Philly, carrying 4 people and maybe going 130 miles an hour is not flying at 35,000 feet with 120 people behind you, et cetera, et cetera. So although I was attempting to reinvent myself within my field, way different. Every day, if you had your door open, you were studying in your room, people were walking by, tie, suit, so they could travel on Eastern back to their home, bag on their shoulder. They'd been let go. Kicked out would be too strong a word, but they'd failed. And after my disaster landing, I was terrified the next day I was going to be called into the chief pilot's office. We had an instructor called Darth Vader, if that tells you anything. I survived. I flew DC-9s for Eastern. But before I could do that, I had to decide to go there, to be an airline pilot. Now, straight lines in life, as you know, can be challenging to navigate. For example, let's do this one. The altar, happily ever after. Straight line? Yeah, try holding on to that one, depending on the length as there is. But my point being that you got to draw the line to where you want to go, where you want to reinvent yourself, how you want to reinvent yourself. So the line represents your values, your goals, the personal things that you feel strongly about. So it's a reference. It's like a rod that you've put there. Now you're going to wander off in the fog. You're going to get discouraged. You'll become cynical. Other people will tell you you'll never do it. All those things happen. But if you draw the straight line, if you can just touch it again, it will accelerate you forward. So having flown almost 50 years, 30-some different aircraft, including helicopters, jets, I found myself reinventing frequently. I was crop dusting in Pennsylvania, and my friend called me up. "Hey, how would you like to be a logging pilot out on the West Coast?" Helicopter logging, can any of you imagine it? Does that mean chopping the trees with a rotor? No. It means flying a 200 or 300-foot line with a hook on it way down there, 10 stories, putting it in the hand of somebody on the ground that can put a cable in there, hook to a log, and down you go. Not picking up, hovering. No, as soon as the hook shuts, you're on your way down the hill. You're going in and out between the trees until the steepness of the mountain, puts all that behind you. And you take it down, drop it off. As you come in, you swing the log out in front of you. You follow it to the ground. You lay it down gently, you don't want to break it. And then as you turn, you release it, and back you go. 8 hours a day, 9 hours a day. We did stop for fuel. My point there was, I was a crop duster. I didn't know anything about logging, but I was told they made 6 figures. So I'm there. I had a family, a wife and 5 children. I love my kids. I hated leaving them, but if I stayed home, I could never make the money I needed to put shoes on their feet and a mortgage payment. But if I went out on these rotations as a helicopter pilot, I could make good money. It was always a back and forth there. When I went there, the first thing I did, when I showed up, is I sat in the back of the helicopter while they picked up logs for 3 days. If I didn't throw up, they were going to offer me the job. I can't even describe the ride to you. Jerking, banging, pulling, and you're using the maximum power in the helicopter. I wrote a letter to my wife and children. I laid it on my pillow every morning when I left the motel. I thought I had about a 50-50 chance of living, but I stuck to my straight line, and I logged for almost 10 years. So, the biggest reinvention, however, that I faced, I was here managing as chief pilot the MedStar program in Lee County for the hospital. They closed that program in 24 hours. They'd had it for 30 years. No one really came out in the public and told what happened, and it doesn't really matter, but I think the county got caught with their foot in the Medicare cookie jar. But anyway, it was over. And in almost 50 years, I didn't have a helicopter or an airplane to go climb in and make a living. I went home. It happened overnight. It's the HR department called at 4 in the afternoon. We want to see you at 8 in the morning. Who wants that call? Nobody. Because you lay awake all night trying to imagine. You don't think they're going to give you a promotion. You're pretty sure it's going to be about something else. I went home. I looked at the wall for 4 months. And I don't mean I watched television. I had no idea where to go. I hadn't thought about retirement, really. I always thought I'd be flying. Short-sighted of me, I'm sure. But like other reinventive situations, sometimes they fall on you, and you just have to reinvent yourself to something where you can survive or something you'd like to do. And maybe it's going to take some reinvention about you, how you look at things, and what you're prepared to do. So there I was, at the end of an almost 50-year career, and I had to figure out how to keep living, how to keep earning a living. And I did what I like to do my whole life. Half the time I was in a job that was arguably one of the first or second most dangerous job in the country. I didn't do that on purpose. I was just doing what I knew how to do. I met someone, Toastmasters, Marianne Osher, who was getting into some retirement counseling. Now, that's the only time I'm going to say the R word because I don't use it. And we started talking. She was generous. She was willing to do it for free because she needed some points to get certified. So we talked. She talked me into going to Toastmasters. That was great. That helped. So it was starting to get there. Then we started, well, what would you like to do? Well, I always wanted to write. About a year before, I had put on paper, after 30 years, a very traumatic incident from a mission in Vietnam. I couldn't write about it and I couldn't talk about it. But I got some help from the VA and I got it down on paper. And it was 11 pages on a computer. It sat there. But after I was talking to Marianne and I'd like to write, I'm like, maybe I have the beginning of a chapter here. So I went back and I started writing. The book isn't all about Vietnam. Each chapter is about a different aspect of my career. But I expanded on the Vietnam situation. Not trauma, but just some of the funny things that happened, some of the other things that happened in Vietnam and so on. And I made a chapter out of it. My first job out of the Army was 600 miles above the Arctic Circle. Now that's in the first chapter. It'd take me a while to tell you. But there I was. I never knew helicopters came on floats. I was landing on a ship. I'm an Army pilot. I'm not a Navy pilot. Anyway, so I wrote that chapter, and so on and so on. And then the challenge of getting the cover and putting it all together. And some of you know April O'Leary. I didn't know April at the time, but I went through the same process, kind of struggling through it, making a lot of mistakes, but I got to the end, and I wrote the book. And then last summer, I wrote the novel, Shadow Children of Saigon, which was based on a short story I had written for a children's literature class 8 years before. Then I decided, I was trying to see if this was good enough for a movie. And Universal picked it up initially, but the agent I had working with me, which is a personal friend of my youngest daughter, her father got very ill and she had to and without anybody pushing it, it kind of disappeared. But I wasn't going to give up because there was interest. So I said, I'm going to write a script. Oh yeah. Writing a script is not writing a novel, believe me. I sat in front of the computer for hours. I had no idea how to start, what they wanted, or how this was going to work. Again, Marianne Osher introduced me to a lady who was published and knew something about film. She hadn't written a script, but we talked for, I think it was at least 2 hours. And a light came on in my head. A switch went. I went back, sat in front of my computer, and had a blast for the next 4 months writing the script. I bought a book called The Bible of Script Writing, and I used that. And I got a good software program, so I didn't have to put all the margins in, et cetera, et cetera. So when you're writing a book, it's tell. Annie's grandmother wanted her to go down to the grocery store and get radishes. Now, how do you put that in a script? Because in a script, it's show. But they don't want you to show too much because there's a director and a producer and investors, and they have all kinds of different ideas. So they need some latitude. So it's a fine line, but anyway, I completed it, put it out for professional evaluation. Came back excellent. Except the dialogue, which stunk. It's not that easy to write the way we talk. So I revamped that. I read a little book on dialogue, revamped that, and resubmitted it. And they liked it. So it was picked up. It's not in production. I'm still working on trying to get traction. That is a very difficult industry. But I know I have a good product. I got it. I scraped some money together and got somebody to professionally do a budget on it. So I'm kind of walking around with my book and my script, knocking on doors, hoping somebody will give me a bunch of money. No. I would like to get my story out there. In closing, I'd like to give you something you can tuck in your pocket. I've been reading Benjamin Netanyahu's his autobiography. And I took this quote from his book. Courage, said the Romans, was not the only virtue. But it was the single virtue without which all other virtues are meaningless. Good luck on your reinvention.